It was the 5th year, and the silence was deafening. Not the comfortable silence of an empty house, which I had grown to cherish in my later years, but the stark, hollow quiet of a missed call, an unread message, a birthday ignored, my own birthday. The calendar on the kitchen wall, still flipping to the previous month, seemed to mock me with its unchanging date. A cruel reminder of the days ticking by since the 17th had come and gone without so much as a perfunctory text from my son, Liam. 5 years, not just a minor oversight, not a busy week but a pattern, an indelible etchmark on the tablet of my heart, slowly, painfully, eroding the vibrant image of the boy I had raised with every ounce of my being. I remembered the day he was born, the shock of him, pink and squalling. A life suddenly hinged entirely on my own, demanding everything, giving nothing but the fierce, visceral love only a mother can understand. That love had been a river, flowing ceaselessly, carving its path through my life, shaping every decision, every sacrifice. And now the river felt dammed, its waters stagnant, mirroring the stagnation of my own expectations for him. He was 21 now, away at university, pursuing a degree in business, a future I had tirelessly, relentlessly built for him, brick by painstaking brick. His calls were always the same, a charming preamble, a quick update on his social life, a casual mention of an upcoming deadline, and then the inevitable pivot. Mom, tuition is due next week. Can you send it over? Always a question, never a doubt, because I always had. Always. Even when it meant skipping my own meals, patching my old coat for another winter, foregoing the small luxuries that might have eased the gnawing loneliness that sometimes settled in the evenings. His education, his future, had become the singular focus of my existence, a financial and emotional black hole into which I poured every spare penny, every ounce of strength, every unspoken prayer. It was the legacy I was determined to leave him, a foundation solid enough to launch him into a life of ease, a life so different from the one I had known. And what had I asked in return? A small recognition, a brief moment of remembrance, a simple acknowledgement of my continued presence, my continued effort, my continued unwavering love. But even that was too much, it seemed. The air in the house felt thick with unspoken resentments, though they were entirely my own, for I had never voiced them. I had always been the quiet one, the one who absorbed, who adapted, who found strength in silent endurance. That strength had been my shield, my solace, my burden. My mother had always told me, daughters are like rivers, flowing gracefully around obstacles. Sons are like mountains, fixed and unyielding. I had scoffed at her old-world wisdom then, but now, looking at the mountain of expectation I had built around Liam, the mountain of his self-absorption, I understood. He was unyielding in his belief that the world, and especially his mother, would simply provide. The tuition statement lay on the kitchen counter, a stark white rectangle against the worn wood, a silent ultimatum, over $12,000, a sum that represented months of meticulous budgeting, of foregoing repairs on the leaking roof, of delaying the much-needed dentist appointment, a sum that represented my life's blood, distilled into numbers on a page. And his birthday calls, always so timely when money was involved, had begun to grate, each ring a fresh wound, a reminder of the chasm between his needs and my own. It wasn't just about the money, not anymore. It was about worth, my worth. Had I become so invisible, so utterly dispensable, that even a simple happy birthday was too much effort? The bitter taste of that realization was a new sensation, sharper and more potent than the familiar ache of neglect. It was the taste of a truth I had long buried, a truth that now demanded to be unearthed, even if it meant tearing my own world apart in the process. I picked up the tuition statement, my fingers tracing the bold black digits, the amount that would secure another semester of his life, another semester of his grand plans, his grand expectations, his grand forgetfulness. I imagined him there, on campus, surrounded by friends, laughing, oblivious, utterly unaware of the quiet storm brewing within the woman who made his existence possible. It wasn't anger that truly consumed me. Not at first. It was a profound, bone-deep weariness. The kind that settles in your marrow, leaving you hollowed out, utterly spent. I had spent a lifetime pouring myself into others, into him specifically. From the moment his father had walked out when Liam was barely 5, I had been both mother and father, provider and protector, shoulder and rock. I'd worked 2, sometimes 3 jobs. My hands, once soft and nimble, were now crisscrossed with the fine lines of age and the rough calluses of hard work. I remembered once, when he was just a boy, maybe 8 or 9, he brought home a wilting dandelion from the park. "It's for you, Mom," he'd said, his small hand pressing the flimsy stem into my palm. "Because you're beautiful." It was such a small thing, so fleeting, but that memory had sustained me through countless sleepless nights, countless moments of doubt. I had clung to it like a talisman, a reminder of the sweet, innocent boy beneath the layers of adolescent angst and, now, adult indifference. His father, Marcus, had been a charming man, effortlessly charismatic, the kind who filled a room with his presence. And then, just as effortlessly, he had emptied it of himself, leaving behind a void, a bewildered child, and a woman who had to learn, very quickly, how to become a warrior. I had sold the small antique porcelain collection my grandmother had left me, piece by cherished piece, to cover a sudden medical bill for Liam when he was a toddler. I had foregone the dream of returning to college myself, the one I'd harbored since I was a teenager, to ensure he had the best preschool, the best primary school, the best opportunities. Every decision had been weighed against his future, his potential, his happiness. My own had become a secondary consideration, then a tertiary, then finally a forgotten concept. This house, our home, was a testament to that sacrifice. It was an old house, sturdy but worn, demanding constant repair. I'd learned to fix leaky faucets, patch plaster, even rewire a faulty lamp, all to save money that could be funneled directly into Liam's life. Every creak of the floorboards, every draft from a window, was a whisper of a deferred dream, a silent reminder of the path I had chosen. And I had chosen it, willingly, lovingly, because I believed in him, believed in the reciprocal nature of love, believed that one day he would see, he would understand, he would appreciate. But the understanding never came. The appreciation remained a distant, shimmering mirage. Each birthday, a small, hopeful ember, flickering to life, only to be extinguished by the cold breath of his forgetfulness. The first time, when he was 16 and engrossed in his first serious girlfriend, I had rationalized it. Teenage preoccupation, I told myself, a whirlwind of new emotions. I'd called him that evening, pretending I needed a recipe, subtly prompting him. He'd been polite, distracted. The second time, he was 18, just starting university, overwhelmed by newfound freedom. "Oh, Mom, was that today?" he'd mumbled, his voice thick with sleep when I'd called him to check on something unrelated. A vague apology, quickly forgotten. The third. He was 19, deep in exams, a stressed-out academic. I'd bought myself a small cake, eaten a slice alone, and told myself it was just a phase, a temporary lapse. The fourth, 20 years old, already showing signs of the casual entitlement that now defined him. No call, no text, not even a social media post. That would have been a fleeting gesture, an acknowledgement of my existence. I saw his post, though, of nights out with friends, of concert tickets, of new gadgets. My heart ached, a slow, dull throb that had become a familiar companion. And now, the fifth, 21, an adult, and still, nothing. Not even a quick happy birthday, Mom. He had called me 2 days after my birthday, not to apologize, not to remember, but to complain about a grade, about a professor, about the exorbitant cost of living near campus. I'd listened, of course. Offered my usual counsel, my usual reassurance, my usual unconditional support. And as he rattled on, oblivious, A switch had flipped inside me, not with a bang, but with a quiet, almost imperceptible click. The river, long flowing outward, suddenly began to redirect its course. It was as if, after years of diligently tending to the delicate roots of another's life, I suddenly felt the profound ache in my own. Long neglected, withering from lack of nourishment, I had given everything, and the well was dry. The tuition statement still lay on the counter, a physical representation of this draining. It was due in 4 days. 4 days, and Liam was still focused on his next party, his next assignment, his next trivial concern. I felt a strange calm descend upon me, a quiet resolution that was both terrifying and exhilarating. This wasn't about revenge. Not truly. It was about survival.
About self-preservation, about a mother.
Quietly strong, finally refusing to be invisible, the thought solidified, cool and hard, like a newly formed crystal. I would not pay his tuition. Not this time. The decision settled in my chest, a heavy, unyielding stone. It wasn't a snap judgment, a burst of indignant anger that would fade with the morning light. No, this had been brewing for years. A slow, simmering resentment that had finally reached its boiling point. Not with a roar, but with a quiet, terrifying resolve. I had spent countless nights staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of neglect, every casual dismissal, every forgotten promise. The countless times he'd casually mentioned needing money for a project, a book, a social event, always delivered with that charming, confident smile that had once disarmed me, but now felt like a carefully crafted mask. The way he would leave dirty dishes in the sink for days, expecting them to vanish, or clothes strewn across his room, expecting them to magically wash themselves. Small things perhaps, but they added up, layer upon layer, until the mountain of his entitlement felt insurmountable. He saw me not as a person but as a resource, an endless well from which to draw without effort or gratitude. I remembered the conversation with my friend Sarah just a few weeks ago. We'd been having coffee, and I, for once, had dared to voice a sliver of my disappointment, couching it in careful, almost apologetic terms. "Liam's so busy these days," I'd murmured, staring into my cooling latte. "University takes up so much of his time." Sarah, with her sharp wit and even sharper understanding of human nature, had simply looked at me, her gaze unblinking. "Busy or self-absorbed, Clara? There's a difference. You know, busyness doesn't erase memory. It doesn't excuse a lack of basic human decency." Her words, though blunt, had resonated deep within me, echoing a truth I had desperately tried to ignore. They weren't a judgment, but a mirror, reflecting back the reality I had refused to see.
The reality that my son was not just forgetful, he was indifferent. And that indifference was slowly suffocating me. The tuition deadline loomed, a stark reminder of the choice I now faced.
The university had sent several reminders, polite but firm, about the approaching payment date. I had simply filed them away, my heart thumping a strange, irregular rhythm. It was a physical manifestation of my internal struggle. Every instinct screamed at me to pay it, to avoid conflict, to maintain the fragile peace, to keep the status quo, to continue being the silent, ever-present provider. But another part of me, a newly awakened part, rebelled. It was the part that remembered the faded dreams, the deferred aspirations, the life I had put on hold, the part that screamed, "What about you?" This wasn't just about Liam. It was about Clara, the woman beneath the layers of motherhood, the woman who had lost herself in the labyrinth of endless giving. Was I to simply vanish into the ether, leaving behind only the legacy of my service to him? The thought was terrifying. And yet, the alternative, the thought of continuing this cycle, felt even more so. I began to prepare for his inevitable call, the one that would come after the deadline, when he realized the money hadn't materialized. I rehearsed my words, not in a script, but in a series of emotional arguments, preparing my heart for the fallout. He would be angry. I knew that. Angry and confused. He would feel betrayed. The irony of it, his feeling betrayed when I had been living with a quiet betrayal for years, was not lost on me. He would probably try to manipulate me, as he always did, with promises of doing better, of being more considerate, promises he would inevitably break. He would likely blame me, twist the situation to make me out to be the villain. This was the part that twisted my stomach. The thought of facing his anger, his accusations. For so long, I had avoided any form of conflict, walking on eggshells, eager to appease to keep the peace. But this peace, I realized, was a hollow one, built on the fragile foundation of my own self-erasure. This time, I would not back down. This time, I would stand firm. The day of the deadline came and went. The sun rose, casting long shadows across my kitchen floor, just as it had every other day, but this day felt different. Lighter. A strange sense of liberation settled over me, mingling with a nod of anxiety. I kept my phone close, bracing myself for the inevitable. The morning passed, in a blur of mundane tasks, watering the plants, organizing old photographs, anything to keep my hands busy, my mind from spiraling. Each tick of the clock was a tiny hammer blow, chipping away at the old Clara, the one who always yielded, always gave. I looked at the old photographs, faded with time. Liam as a baby, his tiny hand clutching my finger. Liam as a mischievous toddler, covered in mud, his eyes sparkling with delight. Liam as a proud graduate, his cap askew, his arm thrown around my shoulder, a picture of filial affection that felt like a cruel deception now. The boy in those photos was so different from the man he had become, or perhaps the man he had always been, cleverly disguised by my own hopeful projections. The love was still there, of course, a deep, abiding ache in my chest, but it was no longer blind. It was wounded, weary, and now finally, seeing clearly. The silence stretched, hours turning into days, until I felt a strange calm descend, a quiet certainty that I had done the right thing, not for him, but for myself. The phone for once was silent. The phone rang 2 days after the tuition deadline, a jarring intrusion into the manufactured calm I had carefully constructed. It was Liam. My heart gave a familiar jolt, a mixture of dread and a strange, nascent anticipation. This was it, the moment I had been bracing for. "Mom?" His voice, usually so effortlessly charming, held an edge, a tight thread of irritation. Did you get the tuition transferred? My account still shows an outstanding balance." He wasn't asking a question so much as stating an expectation, laced with mild annoyance that the world hadn't moved exactly as he'd commanded. His tone immediately confirmed my suspicions. He hadn't bothered to check before the deadline. He simply assumed, always assumed. I took a deep breath, letting it out slowly, consciously steadying my voice. "No, Liam," I said, keeping my tone level, devoid of the emotion that churned inside me. "I didn't." Silent. A prolonged, stunned silence on his end. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head. The rapid calculation, the dawning realization, the assumption of my unwavering support, the bedrock of his existence, had suddenly been pulled out from under him. You didn't?" He finally sputtered, his voice rising, disbelief quickly morphing into something sharper. "What do you mean you didn't?" "Mom, the deadline was 2 days ago. My classes, my registration." His words tumbled out, a cascade of self-centered panic. Not a single question about why, not a flicker of concern for my reasons, just a pure, unadulterated focus on how this affected him. "I know when the deadline was, Liam," I replied, my voice still steady. Though I could feel a tremor starting in my hands, I received the reminders, just as you did. "But why? Is something wrong? Did you forget?" "You never forget, Mom." The accusation was clear, the irony of his words a bitter sting. "You never forget, Mom." Oh, the profound, gut-wrenching irony. "No, Liam, I didn't forget," I said, and for the first time in years my voice held a firmness, a quiet resolve that surprised even myself. "I chose not to pay it." The silence returned, heavier this time, pregnant with unspoken rage. Then he exploded. You chose not to pay it? What kind of a mother does that? Do you have any idea what this means? I could be kicked out. All my hard work, all my future. Are you trying to ruin my life, Mom? His words were like daggers, piercing the fragile shield I had erected around myself. Are you trying to ruin my life? The sheer audacity of it. The colossal self-pity. After years of my tireless, relentless efforts to build his life. Ruining your life, Liam? I countered, a flicker of that long-suppressed anger finally breaking through.
Is that what you call it?
After I've spent every spare penny, every ounce of my energy, for 21 years, to give you every opportunity, to ensure you had a life your father couldn't provide.
Is that what you call it when I finally, for once, make a decision that isn't entirely about you? This is about my education, Mom.
He thundered, utterly deaf to the undertones of my words. My future. How can you just abandon me like this? What about all your promises? You always said you'd support me, no matter what. And I have. Liam, I said, my voice softening, the anger replaced by a deep, melancholic sadness. I have supported you, through scraped knees and broken hearts, through school projects and rebellious phases, through countless late nights working so you could have a better life. I supported you even when you forgot my birthday for the first time, and the second and the third and the fourth. And yes, even for the fifth. The phone line crackled, and for a moment I thought he might hang up. But then a different tone entered his voice, a manipulative edge, a performance perfected over years. Mom, don't be like this. It was just a birthday. I'm sorry, okay? I'm truly sorry. University is just so demanding, you know? My head is buried in books. Deadlines are crazy. I genuinely forgot. It slipped my mind. But that's no reason to jeopardize my entire future. Please, Mom. Just send the money. I'll make it up to you. I promise. I'll come home. We'll have a proper celebration. I'll take you out to dinner. Anything you want. The words were a carefully constructed lie, a hollow promise designed to elicit the desired response. He knew my weaknesses, knew how desperately I craved his affection, his attention, his love. He was playing the only card he knew, the one that had always worked. But this time, it fell flat. The years of neglect, the quiet disappointments, had finally built a wall too high for his charming facade to scale. No, Liam, I repeated, the two words feeling both heavy and liberating. I won't. I could hear his sharp intake of breath. I'm not trying to ruin your life. I'm simply asking you to take responsibility for it. For your education, for your future, and yes, for your actions. Your forgetfulness, as you call it, isn't just a lapse in memory. It's a pattern of neglect, of taking me for granted, of seeing me as an endless source of resources, rather than as a person with feelings, with needs, with a life of my own. Mom, this is ridiculous, he shouted, dropping the pretense of contrition.
You're being overdramatic. This is blackmail. You're punishing me over a stupid birthday?
What kind of a mother does that? I need this money, Mom. I need it. His voice was laced with an almost desperate entitlement. It was the voice of a child who had never truly learned that consequences existed, that actions had repercussions. Perhaps, I said, my voice quiet, almost a whisper, yet resonating with an unfamiliar authority. Perhaps this is what it takes for you to finally see me, Liam, not just as your mother but as Clara. And then I hung up. The click echoed in the suddenly silent room, a definitive end to a conversation, and perhaps to an era. The tremor in my hands had subsided, replaced by a strange, exhilarating calm. The stone in my chest still felt heavy, but now it felt like ballast grounding me rather than weighing me down. The silence that followed was a different kind of silence than the one before. It wasn't the emptiness of neglect, but the tense, waiting stillness after a storm has broken. My hands, which had trembled during the call, were now steady, almost surprisingly so. I walked over to the old, chipped ceramic mug on the counter. the one Liam had made for me in kindergarten, unevenly painted with a smeared heart. It used to be a cherished item, a symbol of his early innocent affection. Now, it felt like a relic from a forgotten past, a testament to a connection that had slowly unraveled. I picked it up, my fingers tracing the rough edges. It felt hollow, just like his apology, just like his promises. The immediate fallout was precisely as I had anticipated, though the intensity of it still surprised me. Within the hour, my phone began to buzz with calls. Not from Liam, but from my sister, from Marcus's sister, my ex-sister-in-law, and eventually, from Marcus himself, a man I hadn't spoken to in years except for the occasional perfunctory text about Liam's schooling, always initiated by me. "Clara, what have you done?" my sister, Eleanor, wailed, her voice shrill with distress. "Liam just called me, absolutely distraught. He says you've cut off his tuition. Is this true? Are you out of your mind?" I explained, calmly as much as one can explain years of quiet suffering over a phone line. I spoke of the 5 forgotten birthdays, the relentless taking, the complete lack of consideration. "But it's his future, Clara," she argued, completely missing the point. "You can't jeopardize his future over a few forgotten dates. Boys are like that. They're forgetful. He's stressed with exams. You're being vindictive." Vindictive. The word hung in the air, a cruel echo of Liam's own accusation. "Eleanor," I said, my voice flat, "I've spent the last 21 years building his future. I've sacrificed my own. 5 forgotten birthdays were just the straw that broke the camel's back. It's not about the birthdays. It's about being seen. It's about respect. It's about boundaries." She scoffed. "Boundaries? With your own son? You're being ridiculous. Just pay the tuition, Clara. Don't do something you'll regret." I let her words wash over me, familiar currents of judgment and misunderstanding. She, who had always been the golden child in our family, the one whose children were perfectly balanced and perfectly grateful, could never truly comprehend the quiet battles I had fought. Then came Marcus's call. His voice, surprisingly, was calm, almost paternalistic. "Clara, I hear there's a situation with Liam's tuition. He's very upset. Can we talk about this like adults? I'm sure we can find a solution." Adults. The irony was thick enough to choke on. The man who had abandoned his responsibilities, who had offered sporadic, minimal child support, but no emotional presence, was now lecturing me on adulthood. "Marcus," I said, my voice cool, "the solution is that Liam takes responsibility for his own actions and his own education. He's 21. He needs to learn that actions have consequences. But he's your son, Clara. You're his mother. It's your duty to provide for him." His calm facade finally cracked, revealing the self-righteous indignation beneath. "My duty," I replied, my voice gaining strength, "was to raise him, to educate him, to make him a responsible adult. I've done that. Now it's his turn, and a mother's duty does not extend to being a doormat, Marcus, nor does it mean sacrificing her entire identity for a child who doesn't even acknowledge her existence." He tried to argue, to cajole, to guilt-trip. He brought up old memories, old obligations. But I held firm. Surprisingly so. The quiet strength I had always possessed was finally being unleashed, not in a destructive burst, but in a steady, unyielding resolve. I listened to his arguments, to Eleanor's pleas, to the subtle manipulations designed to make me feel like a cruel, heartless monster. But their words, instead of wounding me, only solidified my conviction. They didn't see the years of silent suffering, the constant giving, the emotional toll it had taken. They only saw the immediate disruption to their comfortable narrative of me as the ever-sacrificing mother. The university called a few days later, a polite but firm voice informing me that Liam's registration had been suspended due to non-payment. I simply confirmed that I would not be making the payment at this time. The weight that had pressed down on me for so long, the constant burden of his financial well-being, began to lift, slowly, incrementally. I felt a strange mixture of emotions. a profound sadness for the loss of the relationship I had always envisioned with my son, a sharp pang of regret for the pain he was undoubtedly experiencing, but also, surprisingly, a burgeoning sense of liberation. The air in my home, once thick with the invisible threads of obligation and expectation, now felt lighter, cleaner. I spent the evening sitting on my porch swing, watching the last embers of the sunset fade into the horizon. The old house, my sanctuary, suddenly felt like my own again, not just a place to store Liam's childhood memories and his future dreams. It was a space where I could finally breathe, where I could begin to rediscover the woman I had been before motherhood had consumed me, the woman I was meant to become. The quiet battle was far from over, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was winning, not against him but for myself. The days that followed were a strange blend of quiet peace and lingering tension. Liam's calls stopped, replaced by a series of increasingly agitated messages from his father, threatening legal action, accusing me of emotional abuse, and painting me as a vindictive, unstable woman. Eleanor continued her daily calls, alternating between tearful pleas and sharp accusations, trying to leverage familial guilt, but I found myself increasingly immune to their manipulations. It was as if a thick skin had finally grown over my once raw emotions. The familiar ache of their disapproval still pricked, but it no longer pierced me to the core. I had endured worse, silently for years. One afternoon, I sat at my kitchen table, a cup of herbal tea steaming beside me, and pulled out an old, dusty journal. It was from before Liam, from my early 20s, filled with naive hopes and ambitious dreams. I flipped through the pages, my fingers tracing the faded ink. There were sketches of landscapes, poems about freedom, and half-formed plans for traveling the world, for becoming an artist. A forgotten self stared back at me, a young woman full of potential, unburdened by the weight of expectation. I remembered the joy I used to find in painting, the way the colors flowed from my brush, transforming a blank canvas into something vibrant and alive. That joy had been pushed aside, deemed a luxury I couldn't afford, a frivolous pursuit when there was a child to raise, a future to secure. The canvas had gathered dust in the attic for 2 decades. A week after the tuition deadline, an unexpected package arrived. It was from Liam, or rather from his university, a formal letter stating his withdrawal due to financial reasons, and a return package containing his personal belongings from his dorm room, forwarded to my address as his last known guardian. His books, a few framed photos of his friends, a worn hoodie. It was a tangible representation of the consequence, a stark reminder of the future I had supposedly ruined. I held the hoodie, burying my face in the soft fabric, inhaling the faint scent of him, laundry detergent and something uniquely Liam, a blend of youthful energy and a hint of something sweet. A wave of profound sadness washed over me. This wasn't what I had wanted. I hadn't wanted to see him fail. I had wanted him to see me, to understand the depth of my sacrifice, the years of quiet giving. But he hadn't, and perhaps this was the only way he ever would. The days continued to unfold, slow and deliberate. I started small. I bought a new set of paints, humble ones from the local art supply store. I set up a small easel in a corner of the living room, next to the window that overlooked the overgrown garden. The first few strokes were clumsy, hesitant. My hands, more accustomed to scrubbing and lifting, felt alien holding a brush. But as the colors began to blend, as a familiar landscape emerged on the canvas, a sense of peace, a quiet joy, began to bubble up inside me. It was a joy I hadn't felt in years, a connection to a part of myself I had long mourned as lost. This wasn't about revenge, or even about punishment. It was about self-reclamation. It was about filling the void that his neglect had created, not with anger, but with creation. Liam made no further direct contact. His father, however, continued to badger me, eventually sending a terse email informing me that he was exploring alternative funding options for Liam, and that Liam was considering all legal avenues against me for breach of parental support. I simply deleted the email. Their threats felt hollow, lacking the power they once held over me. I knew my legal standing was solid. Liam was an adult, My obligation, morally and legally, had long been fulfilled. The unspoken conflict, the simmering resentment that had defined our relationship, was now out in the open, raw and exposed. And in that rawness, I found a strange kind of liberation. There was no more pretense, no more acting the part of the perpetually supportive, perpetually invisible mother. I found myself reflecting more deeply on the nature of love, particularly parental love. It was a wellspring, yes, but even a wellspring can run dry if it is constantly drawn from without being replenished. I had replenished it with my own quiet strength, my own self-belief, but it had been a solitary act. I had longed for reciprocation, for a glimmer of understanding, for a shared burden, and in its absence, I had learned to provide for myself, to validate my own worth. The bitterness which had clung to me like a shroud for so long began to dissipate, replaced by a bittersweet acceptance. My son, the person I had dedicated my life to, might never truly understand the depth of my love or the reasons behind my action, but I understood, and that I realized was enough. I was learning to paint my own life in colors of my own choosing, regardless of whether anyone else would ever truly see the masterpiece I was becoming. The canvas was large, and my brush strokes, though still tentative, were growing stronger, bolder with each passing day. The quiet revolution within me had begun, and there was no turning back. The transformation was gradual, almost imperceptible at first, like the slow opening of a tightly closed bud, but it was happening. I started taking long walks in the park, something I rarely did before, always feeling too busy, too burdened. I noticed the way the light filtered through the leaves, the intricate patterns of bark on the old oak trees, the vibrant colors of wildflowers pushing through the asphalt cracks. My senses, dulled by years of internal focus, seemed to awaken, drinking in the world around me. I even joined a local art class, a small group of mostly older women who shared my newfound passion for painting. They didn't know the story of Liam, of the forgotten birthdays and the withheld tuition. They only saw Clara, the quiet woman with surprisingly vibrant brushstrokes, the one who painted landscapes that seemed to hum with an unspoken emotional depth. Their simple camaraderie, their shared laughter over spilled paint, was a balm to my weary soul. I still received occasional calls from Eleanor, her voice a little less shrill now, tinged with a reluctant curiosity. "So what's Liam doing?" she would ask, feigning nonchalance. I would tell her calmly that he was working, that he was exploring options, that he was taking a gap year. The truth was, I didn't know much beyond that. He had indeed gotten a job, a low-paying one at a local grocery store, a stark contrast to the brilliant future he had envisioned for himself. I heard it through my ex-sister-in-law, who still occasionally, cautiously, reached out. The information came with a dose of judgment, of course, about how I had ruined him, how he was struggling. But this time, it didn't cut as deep. He was learning, in the harsh crucible of real life, the value of hard work, the weight of financial independence, and perhaps, though I dared not hope too much, the true cost of taking everything for granted. My focus was on myself. I started eating better, cooking for one, savoring each meal. I revisited old hobbies, dusted off forgotten books, and even started a small garden in the backyard, coaxing life from the soil with patient, loving hands. The little patch of green was symbolic, a representation of the new growth within me. I pruned back the overgrown branches, pulled the tenacious weeds, and nurtured the delicate seedlings. It was hard work, but deeply satisfying, a direct contrast to the one-sided effort I had invested in Liam for so long. There were still moments, of course, when the ache of missing him, the son I had idealized, the son I had believed in so fiercely, would wash over me. Old photographs, a specific song on the radio, a fleeting memory of his childhood laughter. They would trigger a wave of bittersweet nostalgia. But these waves no longer drowned me. They were passing currents, allowing me to acknowledge the loss without succumbing to it. The power dynamic had undeniably inverted. For years I had been beholden to his needs, his demands, his approval. Now he was the one navigating a world without my safety net. experiencing the very real consequences of his choices. I often wondered if he was angry, resentful, or if a glimmer of understanding had begun to penetrate his self-absorption. I knew it wouldn't be easy for him, but life wasn't always easy. And sometimes, the most profound lessons are learned in the crucible of hardship, not in the comfort of unwavering support. I thought of the future. What would happen when he needed to return to school? Would he approach me differently? Would he understand that respect and reciprocity were prerequisites for my continued support? I didn't know. And for the first time, I felt a strange calm about that uncertainty. My future was no longer entirely defined by his. One crisp autumn morning, as I was adding the finishing touches to a painting of my garden, the doorbell rang. My heart gave a little flutter. I rarely had visitors. Standing on my porch, looking uncertain and a little thinner than I remembered, was Liam. He wasn't smiling. His usual charming facade was gone, replaced by a weary vulnerability I hadn't seen in years. "Mom," he said, his voice quiet, almost hesitant. Can I come in?" I looked at him, truly looked at him, perhaps for the first time in a long time. There was no apology, no immediate plea, no manipulative charm, just a tentative request, a raw, unvarnished presence. The silence stretched between us, laden with years of unspoken words, of quiet battles, of fractured love. The old me would have immediately ushered him in, prepared food, smothered him with concern. But the new me, the Clara, who had emerged from the crucible of betrayal and self-reclamation, simply met his gaze, my eyes holding a depth of emotion he had perhaps never truly encountered. The air was thick with the weight of our shared past and the daunting uncertainty of our future. This was not a quick fix, not a simple reconciliation. This was the beginning of something new, something hard-won, and entirely, painfully real. I stepped aside, a small, almost imperceptible gesture, and let him in. The silence inside the house was different now, heavy with unspoken truths, but also with a fragile sense of possibility. He looked around the living room, his gaze lingering on the easel, the canvas with my half-finished garden painting. He'd never seen me paint before, not seriously. It was a visual representation of the shift in my life, a silent testament to the person I was becoming. He sat on the edge of the sofa, looking uncomfortable, his hands clasped between his knees. The usual swagger was gone, replaced by a nervous energy that was both unsettling and, strangely, a little disarming. "Mom," he started, his voice a low murmur. I know you probably don't want to hear this, but I'm sorry." It wasn't the immediate self-serving apology I had braced myself for. This one was different. Halting, almost choked. "Not just for the birthday," he continued, without me prompting him, for everything. For taking you for granted. For acting like you were just always there. Like a vending machine. He swallowed, his eyes meeting mine, and I saw a flicker of raw emotion, a genuine vulnerability that pierced through the carefully constructed walls I had built around my heart. "Working. It's harder than I thought, and realizing how much everything costs, how much you've paid for everything. It's humbling and terrifying." My heart ached, a complex mixture of vindication and profound sadness. This was the first true acknowledgement I had ever received, a crack in the fortress of his entitlement, but it had taken so much. It had taken his entire world being upended.
I never wanted to ruin your life, Liam.
I said, my voice softer than I'd intended. I wanted you to see me, to understand what it takes to build a life, what it means to be responsible, to value what you have. He nodded, his gaze dropping to his hands. "I get it now, Mom. I really do. It's not just about the money. It's about respect. And I haven't shown you any. Not really. I've been a terrible son." The words hung in the air, stark and painful. He wasn't seeking forgiveness. Not yet. He was simply stating a truth, acknowledging his failures. We talked for hours that day, not about the tuition, not about his future plans, but about our past, about the silent expectations, the unspoken resentments. He talked about his frustration, his confusion, his anger when he realized his tuition hadn't been paid. He admitted to calling his father and Eleanor, to feeling betrayed and lost. But he also spoke about the grocery store job, the long hours, the exhaustion, the humbling experience of having to count every penny. He spoke about seeing his friends, still living their privileged lives, and feeling a strange, uncomfortable envy that slowly morphed into a grudging respect for their parents. And then finally, for me, he admitted that the initial shock had led to a deep, bitter anger. But that anger had slowly, painstakingly begun to unravel, revealing the underlying fear and regret. He even mentioned the 5 forgotten birthdays, specifically. "I don't know why, Mom," he confessed, his voice thick with shame. "I just got so caught up in myself, in what I thought I needed. And I stopped thinking about what you needed." It was a raw, painful conversation, full of emotional landmines, but it was also profoundly healing. There were no grand pronouncements, no promises of immediate change, just an honest reckoning, a laying bare of wounds. He didn't ask me to pay his tuition again. Not that day, not in the days that followed. He simply listened, absorbed, and began to articulate his own understanding of the chasm that had grown between us. The air in the house didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt cleared, like after a thunderstorm had swept through, leaving behind fresh, clean air. Our relationship wouldn't be the same. I knew that. The years of silent sacrifice and his casual neglect had left scars that would never fully fade. But now at least there was a foundation of honesty, of mutual recognition. He was a mountain, yes, but perhaps he was learning to bend, to understand the flow of the river that had nourished him for so long. And I, the quiet river, was finally learning to carve my own path, to demand the respect I deserved, to fill my own well. My son's journey and my own were far from over. He was still learning, still growing, still figuring out what it meant to be an adult. And I was still learning, still growing, still figuring out what it meant to be Clara, beyond just being a mother. It was a bittersweet victory, laced with the pain of what had been lost, but also imbued with the powerful hope of what could still be gained. The house, once a silent testament to my sacrifice, now hummed with the quiet, empowering symphony of my own life, newly reclaimed, bravely lived.